Well, here we are in Lockport at the homestead, at the home built in 1843 with a few additions here and there, just like the story that's about to unfold for you. We're going to talk to Dorothy Wurst, and we're going to gather some family members around, and they'll be asking some questions to kind of expand the story for you so that whoever you are who's watching this and the families that come and the children and the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren who we hope will enjoy this story. So let's come inside and visit with Dorothy and find out more about the Wurst family in Lockport. As promised, we're going to be visiting with the Wurst family in Lockport. And the star of this particular story, this heritage, this history, just for you, is Dorothy. And we'll be talking with Dorothy and visiting with us and listening and sharing their story as well later on. We have right next to Dorothy, in quotes, her favorite daughter, Sally. And next to Sally, we have Cindy. And these two are going to share some very special stories just for you. Now, as you see in the picture right now, we're talking to, and we will be talking with later on, I think it's Grandma with a special guest, Kaylee, and that is Sandra. And next to Sandra, we have Mark. And all of this wonderful members of the family, of the Wurst family in Lockport, are going to be sharing their stories. And as they do, you're going to learn a little bit of the history of the Wurst family in Lockport. So let's begin.
Yes.
Dorothy, the camera's on you, the sound is going, and we're going to go back in time a bit.
Okay.
You're a young, at this moment in time, a young 91 years old. Mm-hmm. And I want you to share a little bit about where you were born, what year, where did it take place?
I was born in Iowa, Waterloo, and the year was 1916. It's just the last week of the year. I was born the 26th of December, so I almost made it to 17.
Was this a hospital or at home?
No, it was at home.
Mm-hmm.
Babies were born at home when I was born. And we had a midwife, my mother did, and this woman lived about 3 doors down the block. And it was I've been told, a very bad snowy day. The doctor lived 2 houses the other way. That's how neighborhoods were then, you know. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why he couldn't get through the snow, but he couldn't get through the snow because Mom said I would have been born on the 25th if he could have made it. But the nurse, the midwife, kept me from being born, I guess, until the doctor came.
Until the doctor came, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The winter time in you said Iowa, but what town in Iowa?
That's Waterloo, and it's in northeast Iowa, and it's kind of in a more severe weather pattern than some of Iowa.
Yeah.
It kind of gets the Minnesota, Wisconsin stuff.
Yeah.
And we could get 26 below as I was growing up many times going to school.
Well, you warmed things up. You brightened that day
Oh, I hope.
for Mom and Dad. And tell me a bit about Mom and Dad.
Well, they were, I don't know, my dad was a baker.
Okay.
And he worked nights. All of my growing up years, he was a night worker because you have to have fresh bread in the morning, as far as he was concerned. Now, he was working for a bakery. He didn't own a bakery until I was almost grown up. But it took a while because they had just come over from Germany in 1914.
The two of them?
With their 3 children, my sister and 2 brothers.
So they were born in Germany?
They were all born in Germany. They spoke no English. And in 1914 it was kind of hectic because there was a lot of anti-German feeling. And he experienced some of that, which in his final years he got to reminiscing about and rather upset. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Especially when things keep recurring, you know, with different nationalities as wars come up.
Sure.
So he would remember things that happened when he was newly over here.
So your mother and your dad, were they in the same village, the same town, the same area of Germany?
Well, they were all in northwest Germany. My mother was born near Oldenburg, which is almost on the Baltic Sea, you know, or the North Sea it is. And Dad was from near Hanover, but they met in the town of Wilhelmshaven, which is a well-known German port town. And I don't know, Dad was working for somebody then in the bakery business, but they tell me they met on the stairs when he was delivering bread or rolls or something to a family. And I don't know what she was doing, but she was on the stairs, and I guess that started the conversation. And the funny thing was, there's a lot of dialects in Germany, and her dialect was different from his. His is High German, and hers was well, anyway, from the Oldenburg area. It's not quite the same kind of German. And they had a little difficulty in getting through to each other.
Really? That's interesting. Different dialects in Germany.
There's a southern, I thought when I was in service, I'd have no problem. But we were in the Bavarian area, and that German is so different. So it isn't easy. They all have their dialect.
Yeah. So you mentioned briefly the 3 born in Germany.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about your brothers, and was it one brother and the rest of sisters?
My sister is the first child. She was born in 1910. My parents were born in 1909, and my sister was born in 1910. And Otto was the next child, and he was born in 1912. And then Carl was born in 1913. And then they came to America in 1914. So that must have been quite a busy trip for my mother, looking after 3 little ones.
Can you imagine on the ships in those days, with all those kids running around? And
there's a picture of my dad on the ship with my sister, but there's no pictures of Mom and the two boys.
Interesting. Let me go back for just a moment. You mentioned that Dad was a baker.
Yes.
In those days in Germany, they had the guilds and the craftsmen.
Right.
Do you remember, or were you told, was there you didn't just become a baker?
No, you had to go through an apprenticeship, and you had, he has a baker's certificate. It's all in German, very, very ornate. But he was trained by some expert bakers because they were, this was in Hanover where royalty and I understand that he was in one of the palaces and he learned to make some really good things.
Yeah. Now you mentioned the certificate. We don't have a copy here for you right now, but there is an existent existing certificate.
Yeah, my nephew has it, and he's promised to make copies. And I think he got his certificate probably in before he was married, because he was able to get married and afford to get married.
Yeah. Well, briefly give me a little more of a background and a bit about showcasing brothers and sisters.
Well, the two boys, my sister had lots of memories of Germany, but the boys had none when they came to this country. So they grew up American. Mm-hmm. And my sis didn't speak English to begin with, but when you're young, you learn it fast. So she never had an accent. Mother and Dad had an accent quite a while. My dad never lost his. But my mother, once we children were attending school, she was in the books right with them, and she did beautifully on her English. What
career paths did the brothers and sisters leave Iowa, or?
Well, no, I'm the only one who left Iowa.
Oh, I thought so.
Yeah, let's see, the oldest boy, that was Depression when he was in high school, and it wasn't important to finish high school, and he didn't. And he lied about his age and got a job driving a truck at 16 mm-hmm. for Rath Packing in Iowa, in Waterloo, Iowa. And he was driving the highways, and that was his career, was being delivering supplies to various places all the way to the East Coast and the West Coast.
Right. So he was a trucker.
A trucker, yeah.
And the rest of the family?
Well, Carl, in 1918, all over the world, was the 1918 flu, and he was about 5 when this happened, and he got it. He almost didn't make it, but he did make it. He did survive, but it affected his heart, although I didn't know it, and I don't know if anybody knew it. And he died at about age 22, but he was a very quiet person, and I think it had something to do with the fact that he had a bad heart. I never understood, but I thought he was a great brother. He really was good to me, and he was extremely smart. Schoolwork was nothing for him. He could get it done in no time, and he could handle math, everything. I think he was smarter than anybody else in the family, but we didn't get a chance to find out how that was going to turn out, because he died of a stroke at age 22.
Mm-hmm. And the rest?
Well, then Vernon was the first one born in 1914, and we were buddies too. He was born on Christmas Day, 2 years before me, and I was born the day after Christmas in 16. So I think that started it, because he told me there was no Santa Claus. And I would ask him questions, and about schoolwork. Now, Carl would, work with me, but he would just say, "Look it up." Vernon wasn't about to tell me. Now, Vernon was, now there's Frida, my sister, Elfrida, and then there's Otto, and then there's Carl. And Vernon was really Werner, because he got a German name. But they changed it to Vernon at school, They couldn't understand Werner. And then there was me at 16, in 1916. And then there was a break for a while, and then finally in 22, I had another brother, Albert. So we're still giving German names. And the last one's name was Ewald, and he was born in 24. So they're all good German names. And let's see, Vernon, Vernon was in the war. He was probably the first person, I think, drafted when war was declared, because he was, my folks were hoping that they could keep him with them because they had just opened up their business for baking. Dad finally managed to get enough together to get the bakery going, and he was his expert help. And they took him away, and he went in April of 41. Now, we didn't even go to war until December. And he went to the South Pacific, and he was very badly wounded when they made the landing of the Philippines. And took a couple years to get him home, but he came back to the bakery, and he died at age 50. He probably died from his injuries because he blew a blood vessel in the brain, and that was it.
For years, though, he continued on with the business.
But he continued for about 18 years. But I think he knew something was wrong because he really had everything right up to the date. There was he was so organized that he just was going to make sure there was no problems when he was gone. And then there was me. And
well, we're going to get to you in a minute.
We'll
we have everybody covered?
No, then there's Albert.
Okay.
And Albert was a very good student, too. He just breezed through school. And then he went to Iowa State and got his degree in engineering. And they thought a lot of him at John Deere, and they sent him to Heidelberg. And he drew up the plans for their Mannheim plant for John Deere, and he was there for about 7 years. And
rather ironic that he would be sent to Germany.
Yeah, and you know, he didn't know a word of German. And he refused to learn it, and he always had a interpreter. I thought that was pretty nasty of him.
Commentary.
He just, you know, of course, they'd been in America for so long, he was so American, you know. And then Ewald, he went with John Deere, and he did quite well in John Deere. He was very good on computers and what all?
Electronics.
What? Electronics.
Okay.
Electronics. He was just, he enjoyed it. And he just devoted a lot of time to it, you know, and was good at it. And very cheerful. You couldn't make him mad.
Now, as we're talking about your brothers and sisters, now they all had families. Were they all married?
Everybody married, yeah. Well, the two oldest, Frida was married at 18, and Otto married about at 18 too. And then I think we were kind of soured on marriage because nobody got married for a long time. So.
But finally they did.
Yeah. Carl, of course, died, so there was nothing there. But Vernon.
So he died. He did not get married.
He did not get married. No. Well, let's see. Vernon married a Waterloo girl, and they didn't have children. But, and then he died at age 50. So then, but he was just devoted to the family and worked very hard for them. I know they depended on him a lot because he really managed the whole business for them because Dad was baking. He was baking all the time.
Well, good.
And my mother worked there too.
Oh,
she was so happy to get out of the house and manage the store and get to know the customers. They really had a lot of very faithful customers because he made good things. And people would come to the bakery that for miles around and load up and take it home and put it in the freezer because they liked what they bought.
Good reputation. How long was the bakery in existence?
It was started in '33, and it went until when Vernon died in '66. Well, his last words were, sell a bakery, which his wife didn't want anything to do with the bakery. And she'd never paid any attention much to the bakery. So, and they had no children. So they wanted to give it to my sister, but you don't give things to women. She could have handled it.
In those days, maybe.
She really knew it because she worked there too. Sure. And she could have handled it, right?
Oh, definitely.
Oh, she was good. But they sold it to someone who had just been a donut fryer. And he would take it if she would go with him. But that was a mistake. Mm-hmm. So it was not a good deal because he wouldn't listen to her. And it was not the bakery it was anymore because he just...
Yeah, that's usual.
Yeah.
It was an end of a time.
It spoiled the whole product line and everything. And he didn't do things the way that she was used to. And she thought he would listen to her, but he wouldn't.
What was the name of the bakery?
Weber King Bakery, my maiden name.
Very good.
Yeah.
Now, before we go on, not knowing who's watching, I do have to make one comment that Vernon told Dorothy early on, and that is, yes, there is a Santa Claus. Okay? You never know who might be watching this.
Okay.
In the time of the Santa Claus era and a little older, what was it like being a kid in Waterloo, Iowa?
Well, my mother thought we should have religion, so we all had to go to the Lutheran school. Mm-hmm. And we had to walk about 7 or 8 blocks. And we didn't have a car. My dad never owned a car. And of course, Iowa can be cold. And I can remember when I'd arrive at school, it was a small school, a total of 100 students for 8 grades. And 2 teachers, each with 4 classes. And there were, we even had German lessons for a couple of years anyway. There was no kindergarten, and my mother had her hands full, so she sent me to school at 5. Nobody checked, so I was in 1st grade at 5. And, of course, we kind of went as a bunch to school as long as we were still in that school, and we looked after each other. But as I said, in the winter, this one teacher would take our hands and warm them with his hands, try and get the color back in them, because we tried to dress warm, but they didn't have the clothing at that time that you have today. And
did you have the wool mittens with the string up the sleeves?
Yes, we had. We lost our mittens, so we had a little thing around the neck, and it clipped onto the mittens so that you'd still have your mittens, because you couldn't buy mittens, every time you turned around. You didn't dare lose them. And it was a good school. We learned a lot. But
where you lived, Dorothy, though, I'm assuming you lived in town.
In town, yeah, okay. We did.
So what was the neighborhood like? What were the neighborhood kids like? Who'd you play with?
Well, the newspaper at the time of World War II had a full-page picture of all the kids in this block, and the one this way, and one shooting off this way, and there were 36 people in that single page, and 2 girls. It was me and another one that were in service. But they had That's how many children, and we pretty much knew each other. It was big families mostly, and there were Italian, and there were Danish, and there were English, of course, and German, and a mixture, all kinds of names. Muzio was one of the Italian boys, Muzio Ficarello, and his brother. They lived 2 doors. And then we had, the Lederman family. It was a Jewish family. I practically grew up Jewish because I was there all the time. They were very good to me, and he had a men's clothing store in Waterloo, the father did. But Marvin and Marion and Ruth were probably my best friends in that neighborhood.
Good memories.
Good memories. They were very good people.
I just thought of a question I should have asked earlier. When you're mentioning Waterloo, Iowa, why Waterloo, Iowa? How did Mom and Dad get to Waterloo, Iowa from Germany?
Well, he had some uncles that were farming there. And they came in about the 1880s, I would think. For one thing, my dad told me there was all young men had to serve in the military in Germany, and if they wanted to get away from that, they had, this was their escape. They would go to America. And I think all of his uncles except one, which was his father, settled on farms around Waterloo.
Ah, okay. Your favorite, what did you do as a kid? You were talking about the neighborhood in Waterloo, Iowa. What
we played.
What kind of games? What was
Tin
it like?
can out.
And that is?
You have a squash a can, and everybody, one person is blindfolded, and they kick the can, and then this person has to find the can and try and tag somebody to come back to that area, and then they have to be the one that is blindfolded.
Okay.
It's a dumb game, but we sure played it a lot, and we got a lot of exercise because we always played in the street, or in our. We didn't grow grass. Nobody had grass because it was a play lot. We all had play lots, and a lot of broken windows because if you were batting a ball, it went through somebody's window.
Were you a tomboy?
I climbed trees. My mother used to worry I'd be way up in the tree. Yeah. I loved it.
Did you have pets? Did you have any pets?
I had cats. My mom wouldn't allow a dog, and I don't think it mattered to me, but I had a cat. I was always holding a cat. In every picture they took, I had a cat of some sort.
You mentioned, when I asked you about Waterloo, Iowa, that your father had his uncles who were farming in that area. What was your relationship with what would be your great uncles, I guess?
I think they were great uncles, yeah. And they needed a lot of help on the farm. So when school was out, my brothers all worked on the farm for the summer at various places. There was Louis and I'm trying to think of all their names, but there were a number of them, about 3 or 4. And one of the farms I know was very, very nice, very nice.
As a child, they didn't have organized sports, but did you play any sports at all at that time?
I was the last one picked on sports. I was kind of uncoordinated. So, at school we would have volleyball. That was the only game we played, except for a little baseball out in the lot. But in the gym, it wasn't a gym, it was just a basement, and then we would put a net across, and we played volleyball in the winter for our exercise. And I was pretty good on volleyball, but outdoors, we played jacks and we jumped rope. That was it. That was about the only thing that was available. And our property, it was the parish house and the church and the school. It was all in a triangle. And so that whole triangle belonged to us.
I'm sure there's more memories, but we'll have to kind
I
of
haven't
condense
even thought
it.
about a lot of these things in
Yeah.
years.
The school, and I'm going to ask you about high school in a minute, but
Yeah.
in that school you're talking about, as a 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grader, what were your favorite subjects in grade school? I guess that would be called grade school in those days.
Well, math wasn't one of my favorite ones, and I may be wrong, and I probably shouldn't blame somebody, but I had a rather angry, red-headed teacher, when I was doing multiplication and all that sort of stuff. And he would scare me, you know, and my name was Dorothea, and he would roll it out, you know, and I would be shivering and I couldn't even think. But he would go like this, you know, and I couldn't come up with an answer. So then I couldn't have recess for a whole year. I had to stay in and practice multiplication tables on the blackboard.
For a whole year?
For a whole school year. That was my
We're
punishment.
going to look up his relatives. High school, memories of high school.
It was fun. It was an adjustment. Because we had a 9th grade school, and then we went to another place for 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. But in 9th grade, they had some, I remember Miss Blau was my English teacher, and she gave me an incomplete, my first report card, and I was in tears because I'd always gotten good grades. So I asked her about it. She says, I don't know what you're thinking. And I says, well, you don't ask me. And she says, well, you just got to speak up. But we didn't speak up at Lutheran school. There was a different,
That
you know,
transition, you had to speak up in public
you had to
school.
speak up and promote yourself.
Yeah.
And she said, you know, you got to speak up. So then I decided I better speak up.
High school years, new friends made in those years?
Yeah. It took us, you know, into a larger group of friends. Yeah. Yeah.
The in high school memories, in those high school years, what did Dorothea want to be when she was walking the halls of high school?
I thought I wanted to be an artist.
An artist. Mm-hmm. And why was that?
Because I like to draw things and stuff. And I sent a letter to things that were saying they would teach you art. You could go up to Minneapolis, I remember, and they invited me to come, but of course I was still in school. And besides, my mother said, there's no money in that, you'll never make any progress.
Make any money in being an artist?
In art, no.
No.
No. She wanted me to be a hairdresser, and I didn't want to be a hairdresser. And then when my best friend, who lived across the street from me, she decided she was going to go into nursing, and I thought, I think I'd like that. So my mother told me nasty stories about nursing. She says, you don't want to go into nursing. They have to do an awful lot of things that you won't like to do. So she fought me because I was very persistent about it. And finally, our minister heard about it, and he invited us to join him in his office. And he persuaded my mother that she should let me go. And he says, I'm on the board at a hospital clear across the state, over in Sioux City.
Sioux City, Iowa.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So she was persuaded in his presence anyway. And so I had to take a train from Waterloo through Fort Dodge and all the little towns until we got to Sioux City. But anyway, as she left me by the train, she said, I think I'll be meeting you when you come back in about 2 weeks. And my immediate thought was, I'm never coming back.
And you fulfill that, you know.
But, you know, I think it wasn't just a German culture, I think it was a common culture. She was very good to me, and I can't short her in any way, but she let me know that the boys came first. She had 5 boys. And when it came to what I needed, she says, if there's anything left over, then we'll take care of that. And it didn't happen, see? So I thought, I'm not getting anywhere being surrounded by
That was
brothers.
the culture of the day.
That was the
Yeah, not
culture
just
of the
German,
day.
yeah.
It wasn't her fault. It was, she just expected me to, she didn't feel that money spent on me would be worth it because the boys needed it more than I did.
So in Sioux City, Iowa, you attended, in those days, the hospital
It
taught
was,
the nurses? Is
yes,
that how it worked?
it was a hospital setting. And it was a small hospital, and it was a Lutheran hospital. And it was very strict. It was almost military. We had to do things very exact. And so it was a long day. We had our classes. I was put on the floor to work the day after I arrived. I was feeding patients. I wasn't doing things I hadn't been taught, but I was answering lights. I was doing things. And then we had classes around that time, and in other words, it had to be sandwiched in between those hours. And there were only 10 of us in the class, so it probably wasn't too hard to cover patient care, but there was no division of patients. You could be having a baby, you could be having not a delivery. The delivery OB department was separate, but the rest of the hospital was just wherever you put them.
Mm-hmm. Whatever there was room.
Whatever
bed
there was
empty.
room for. And of course, there was no intensive care. You could have a very critical patient, which you couldn't leave, or you might have an orthopedic, or you might have an infectious case.
Altogether.
Altogether.
How
or
many
children.
years were you there? In the
3
training?
years.
3
It was
years?
a 3-year requirement.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the completion of 3 years, today we call a registered nurse. Is that what it was? An
You
RN?
become registered when you pass your boards. You have to go
Okay.
to and they were held in Des Moines, and I think our whole class passed. We had no problem passing the state boards, and but at that point, I decided I don't want to be a nurse.
Really? Now, what year is
38.
this? 1938.
Yeah.
You have gone through 3 years.
Of
You
nursing.
have received your certification of
I have my
registration nurse,
RN, registered nurse.
and you decide, you have this epiphanous moment, and you say, I don't want to be a nurse.
And it surprised my mother because, then I came home, and she says, well, what are you going to do? And I says, I'm going to rest for a while. And after a while, I sort of wanted some money, and I thought of becoming a lab technician, because I thought that was interesting. And they, see, I graduated in February because I entered in February. They took classes twice a year, but they only held graduation in June. So in June, I went back to Sioux City and graduated. And my mother and dad were too busy working, so they didn't come to it, so I didn't have anybody there. But then I Didn't bother me.
That's a capping graduation where you receive the cap, is that right?
No, you get your cap. They did it different. You couldn't have a cap during probation, and probation meant they were testing you for 4 months to see if you were nursing material. And then you would get a cap. But it didn't have a stripe. And after 1 year, then you got one stripe. And after 2 years, you got a second stripe. So that made the 3 years, total. But then you wore, every school had its own cap design. And that's how you could tell where you trained, by the appearance of the cap. That's no longer true. We don't even wear caps.
Right.
But with mine, I always liked it because it had a wide 1-inch black velvet band on it. And the other thing I liked about my cap, and I'm going to tell you something, I had what I call friendly ears, And to keep the cap on, you had to have a little metal insert where it folded back. And I always tucked my ears in. And I never had to have anything correct my ears, because doing that after 3 years, 2 years, my ears didn't pop out anymore.
Wow. So how does this, set the scene for us? How does this transition into 1938? Now, from 1938 to what, 1941, the war years? And how do you get involved and back into nursing with the branch? Was the Army?
Well, I took a job in Fort Dodge, Iowa. It was a brand new hospital, and
now, you're not a lab tech now, you're a nurse.
No, I'm a nurse.
Okay.
Yeah. And while I'm there, one of the doctors, I didn't hear him coming, and I was at the nurse's station, and he put his hands on my shoulders and he says, "Don't get up." Because I was just almost military. I would stand up in the presence of a doctor. I dropped everything. And I never spoke to a doctor unless he spoke to me, because that's the way I was trained. So he scolded me. He said, "I don't want you jumping up." And he said, "And will you please put on some makeup so I can tell you from the patients?"
And you did. And you did.
So then I decided, well, this is a new world, And then about, let me see, roughly almost a year later, he said to me, "You need to go on to school." He said, I said, "With what?" And he said, "My wife just graduated from Drake University, and they're looking for a school nurse. And I'm going to recommend you if you were willing to go down there and be a school nurse." So they gave me the information I needed, and I went down to Drake University in Des Moines. And I met Dr. Morehouse, who was president of the university. And there's a Morehouse star in the sky that he discovered. It's named after him. He found a star. I didn't know it then. But anyway, he was gray-haired and elderly and very gracious. And after he interviewed me, he says, "Well, you seem awfully young for the job." And I said, "I can produce a few gray hairs if that'll help." And he kind of smiled, but anyway, I got the job, and I had a full scholarship, was my pay, by being the school nurse, and they'd never had one, and I felt very obligated to know everything there is about school nursing. So I went to the University of Iowa to see what they did, and they had this little hospital, and an elaborate setup, and I thought, this isn't what we're about. You know, they've never had anything. So then I came back and talked to the school doctor, who was a woman, and wanted to know what she needed and what we needed to do. And so all I was was the first aid person for people, and then I would help her now and then. But I really didn't have an awful lot to do in the way of nursing. But I noticed that my professor of biology, I wanted to take biology, and he says, no, you already had it. And I says, it wasn't a very good course. And he says, no, you'll set the standard too high. So I still wish I'd taken his biology, because it would have been a good course, but he wouldn't let me come in.
What years are we talking about now?
39, 40, and 41,
okay.
Until from September 39 till June of 41.
Okay.
So for 2 years, I was a school nurse, but I didn't have to work there in the summer. There was no school. So then I took a job in Des Moines at the Methodist Hospital for the summer months, and then came back to the school to finish that second year.
Yeah. So they accepted that Lutheran in the Methodist Hospital, huh?
Yeah.
It was okay?
Oh, it was okay. I didn't want to go to the Lutheran one. I'd had enough Lutheran. I was very reserved, very... In fact, at Drake University, the house mother, I lived in the dorm, and the house mother was brand new, and she was from New York. And she took me under her wing. I kind of knew what she was doing. She was going to bring me out of my shell. She made me come to faculty meetings. She says, you're faculty. She just involved me in everything she possibly could to kind of get me normal, is what I'll say.
Yeah, and now this is June of 1941. What happens between June of 1941 and December 7th of 1941?
Okay. In February, I think, or anyway, it was in the spring, the Red Cross was recruiting nurses for military service. And every nurse, I'm sure, in the country got a letter to sign up for a year. And of course, I didn't have any money while at Drake. My mother sent me $10 in every letter she sent, but I didn't have any spending money, but I had all my books were covered, my board and room, everything was covered. And I thought, I think I'll take a break for a year and just join the military and get a little money ahead, and then I'll be back and finish up, because I came in with advanced standing. I just needed another year to finish at Drake. So I answered it, and then they accepted me, and I went in on the 6th of June of 41. I could pick my date, and so I said, I want to finish my semester, and so then I'll come in. And then I reported down to Fort Leonard Wood, which had just been open a few months in Missouri.
Yeah, lovely place. Lovely place.
It was all barracks and dust.
Let me ask you this. This is a question that I've, in talking to you prior to this interview. In June of 1941, as the Army is recruiting nurses, did the Army use nurses prior to that time in any large part? I mean,
there were
female nurses?
Oh, yes. There were regular Army nurses. Actually, they were career nurses, and they were pretty well running it. But then all of us new recruits from the Red Cross came in, because they were drafting people, all the men for the, see, I told you that Vernon went in April. So they were building these forts or bases, for military buildup. And so we We were just temporary nurses, where there were some that were, they had a permanent
Career
assignment.
Army.
Career,
Yeah.
they were career people. Yeah.
Okay. I
Yeah.
understand that. Did they, when you go into June and you're a nurse getting into the Army, did they give you any additional training?
No, we went right to work. The only thing they did is they gave us a uniform, a white uniform that was traditional. You wore your white shoes and socks, but that was it. We weren't given anything military. But then we had to wear the Army nurse cap. Now, of course, there were Navy nurses and others too, I presume, but I can only talk Army. But anyway, they were just, we just took care of patients, and these were barracks type buildings, and they would have about 40 beds in one big room, and then we'd have about 4 rooms private that for special cases like infection or something. And you were put in charge of a ward, and then you were given enlisted men who would do the chores, you know, like the cleanup and serving trays and things like that. But you just went right to work.
Yeah. In June and July, August, and the summer of 41,
they sent us on maneuvers down to Arkansas.
Okay.
Somewhere.
So what does that mean? What do you mean maneuvers?
Well, they had to train the men, and so they were put out in the field, and then they needed hospital personnel to take care of any problems that came up health-wise. In fact, there was a food poisoning, and they didn't have enough room in the hospital for all the food poisoning, and they had to throw up tents to take care of them, because they were, with diarrhea and vomiting, you can soon be dead. Yeah. So we were awfully busy until we cured them in a short time.
Yeah. When you were on maneuvers,
yeah,
because this is going to follow up with questions we have later on. What kind of a hospital unit did you have? Was it a tent?
Well,
was it out in the open? Did you have a building?
It was a station hospital. It was Camp Robinson.
Okay.
But they had maneuvers nearby, but they were in Louisiana, and they had to bring them up to us. And we sometimes would get 500 in a day.
So what takes place? What is your memory of, if there isn't, that's fine, but what is a memory of that day of December 7th? Any recollection?
Well, I remember it well. I liked horseback riding, and there was a place where we could ride, and there were a few of my friends that enjoyed riding, and it was a Sunday morning, and so we, one of my friends had a car. You could have a car. And so we all piled in the car, and we went over to the place, and we all took our rides, and then we came back to the car and turned on the radio, and there was FDR talking, and I think it's the first time we said it. We're in for the duration.
You knew then?
I knew then I wasn't getting out.
Yeah.
I had been in 6 months, and I knew I wasn't getting out. And of course, I knew my brother was in, and he'd been in more than that, 9 months already. And so I thought, well, here we go.
Yeah. What did you, when FDR is on the radio and he's making that famous speech, and you're thinking you're in for the duration, but was it a shock that the Japanese would do such a thing, that on so-called U.S. soil? I mean, at that time, Hawaii was a territory. What was running through your mind?
Well, you know, when I went to Fort Leonard Wood, I'd been there about 6 weeks when a contingent of doctors, nurses, and administrative staff, a contingent were mobilized to go to the Philippines. And everyone was kind of envious, because that would be a lush assignment, because it's a permanent thing, and they had tennis courts
And warm.
and it's warm and everything. And we were very envious of them for doing this, for being selected. But we found after that that they were opening new posts, and people were being, those of us who just joined, they were being sent to the new places to open up hospitals. And I wasn't too happy about that. I was just getting used to that place. I didn't want to go to another one and break myself in all over again, because it is a learning process. It's always different. But anyway, my ward officer came to me one day and he says, you know, I can't stop it this time. He says, you're going to have to go. You've been here, let me see, I was there a year and a half. And they sent me to Lincoln Air Base. It was just opening up in Nebraska.
Well, Dorothy, at this time, let's talk a little bit about, let's start with Edward, shall we? Edward F. Worst.
Edward Francis Worst.
Craftsman and educator, and tell me a bit about Ed Worst, the beginning of time. He was several things.
He was an educator and an instructor, but he started it out teaching high school right out of graduation from high school.
Well, you told me about that earlier. Now, he taught high school.
In country schools.
Yeah.
And then in Lockport, he taught at Taft School. I don't know how many years at that, but then he went into Chicago and taught in, he became, I don't have enough information to fill in, but something happened to where he became head of industrial arts, I would say, in early 1900s.
Yeah. Before that, though, you mentioned that he was teaching in the rural school.
Yes.
So that people can kind of get an idea of, where that was. Can you take it? You told me somewhere around that White Fence Farm area?
Well, no, it was in closer to Romeoville. Along in there. It was a country school before Romeoville ever was thought of. And it was, a couple of miles down the road north from the Fitzpatrick House, which I think is kind of a retreat for the Catholic diocese.
Yeah. Well, that gives us a landmark to kind of...
Sure, it was along in there.
Okay.
And I presume that there were other schools, but I do know this one because they pointed it out to me. And then we have pictures of him in Lockport with a class that looks to be about 1900 with Taft School students. All the student body is out, and he's standing there with them.
Yeah, now he's married.
And he married Evangeline Chowning Worst in 1905. And he was 40 at the time.
Well, they did marry a little bit later in those days. Yeah, they did.
Yeah, she was about 28, I would say.
Yeah.
And she was a teacher, too.
So, that's probably how they met.
That's probably how they met.
Yeah. So you mentioned something about him becoming the head of industrial arts in the city of Chicago. Is this after he attended Normal?
Oh, yeah. This, I would say, would be about the time he got married.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. He obviously, if they put him into that position, had credibility and credentials by that time.
Yeah, he had earned a lot of good credentials.
Yeah. So what does that mean? I'm not too sure. What does that mean, head of industrial arts in those days?
Well, it would be mechanical drawing. It would be whatever skills people needed to make a living without going to the university for a degree in a professional thing. Okay. But it was to provide living skills for people who were not college material. Yeah.
He really had a heart for that, didn't he? He really loved doing that for people.
He was very devoted to developing what was latent in people. Yeah. And he had a sense of how to identify that this person had a lot of potential.
Yeah. Out of that comes this whole weaving craftsman segment in his life. Tell me a bit about that. What about, he is one, he's been recognized by the Chicago Historical Society as craftsman and educator.
Right.
We know a bit about him being the educator, but tell me more about the weaving. Is that something that connects with Lockport?
Yes, because he always commuted. You know, he had his ties to Lockport, but his strong ties were Chicago, and he commuted. He never drove a car. He had cars, but he either had a driver or somebody to take him around. But his work with weaving began as a result of the superintendent of Chicago schools, who was a woman. Her name was Ella Flagg, if I'm not mistaken. I have a picture of her, and she's very imposing looking, lovely lady, and she wanted weaving, home weaving skills developed by whoever would be interested in all the schools. So in order for him to qualify for that, he had to learn to weave. And so he first went to an industrial weaving in Lowell, Massachusetts to observe that, and was disheartened by that. And then they arranged for him to spend his summers for about the next maybe 8 or 10 years, roughly.
But
in Europe at the various weaving areas.
At that site in Massachusetts, what turned him off about that?
Well, these were just huge machines, and nobody was learning anything. They were just operating the weaving machines, and they weren't establishing any skills because they only had a portion of the total process, so they didn't know it from beginning to end, and this is what he felt they needed to know.
It was the old assembly line.
It was assembly line.
Yeah.
And this he felt was not building character or well-being or skills.
Doing nothing, really.
It was doing nothing for them.
Gave him a few bucks, but not much.
They didn't give him much.
No. So he sent every summer, I would presume.
In fact, when Betty was born, she was born in 1906, and so they went as a family to the various places, Sweden and Norway and Denmark, and I think even Finland, and maybe to Russia, because I know he was in Russia. He brought back some things that we have yet today that he purchased while he was visiting there. But this continued actually until the war started, and then there was no more travel. But he spent his summers in studying and being with the people. In fact,
So he gets the education. He comes back to Chicago. He then shares this with the schools in Chicago. The connection with Lockport, I think, is interesting because there's a farm here in Lockport that was used to...
The Blodgett Farm.
The Blodgett Farm? And what took place there?
Well, he was interested in linen weaving, and so he wanted to take the process from beginning to end, which meant planting the flaxseed, harvesting it, retting it, in other words, getting the flax so that you could end up with linen thread, and he involved the local people. There are a number of people, well, they're not around anymore, but at one time I did meet some of them that were involved with this, and this was all documented in his book on how to weave linens. And of course, his books are out of print now, but I think they're still available through other means. You know, if you look on the internet, you can find what is available that he has written.
Sure. Well, they're in archives someplace. I'm sure they're probably still at the Chicago Historical Society.
Oh, well, our exhibit included this information. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So that is a little bit of a brief.
That's
history,
his background.
Yeah,
You know.
The background on Edward Fitzgerald Wurst.
Francis.
Okay. Now, from Edward, let's touch a little bit because we haven't talked
about
Bill,
my husband
about
yet.
William. And so let's talk a little bit about Bill Wurst. You, by the way, have told us you were in 7 campaigns and in World War II. Did Bill serve in the service?
He served in all the areas I did, but we never met. He was a staff sergeant, and it was with communications with the Signal Corps. So he had to do with timepieces and communication and all that sort of thing. But he went in about Well, he was in, I think, all of 43. Actually, I think he was in 42. I was going to look that up for sure. But he was in almost as long as I was, and he got out about the same time I did, and he was in all the locations I was. But, you know, officers and enlisted men,
Oh, yeah.
there was a big no-no,
Right.
so you had no connection with anybody like that. But when I would talk about a place, he knew it.
Yeah.
You know, and this was a lot of our conversation when we were getting acquainted.
Sure.
We were reviewing the war from beginning to end. He was in Africa, he was in Sicily, he was in Italy, and he was in France.
All the places that you
all
were.
the places
Yeah.
that I was, and so we could compare a lot of our experiences.
Now, you went through the 7 campaigns, and you went through the war, I believe, without injury.
Yeah.
But Bill
Bill
sustained
had
an injury.
He had injuries. He had one in Africa in which I think that some Italian prisoners that had capitulated were helping and were assigned to work with them, and someone threw something, oh, I know, it was telephone reel off of a truck, and it hit him in the neck and broke his neck.
Oh, my goodness.
And it was treated, but he wasn't really cured, and this bothered him the rest of his life.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then in Germany, near the end of the war, he was in a building that got hit directly, and some furniture fell on him. And I think he recovered from that because I didn't get a lot of complaints about that. But the records, incidentally, on the African campaign were lost in St. Louis in a fire, so-called. I mean, they claimed there was a fire where all records were stored. So he never got compensated for anything that happened in Africa. And I think there was nothing to compensate for the injuries in Germany. So he was a little annoyed about that.
Well, I would imagine so. He gets back in 1945.
Right.
That's also the year that he receives, for him at least, what we would probably describe as some disturbing news from his mother who is dying, and before she dies, she tells him something that he did not know his whole
Well,
life.
he never knew he was adopted until she never left the hospital. She was in the hospital in Chicago, and he had gotten home just about a week or so before she died, and she felt that she had to tell him about his background, and that's when she told him he was adopted, which disturbed him a great deal.
Yeah. Before the war, and before he goes into the war, you mentioned to me something about him running, managing, owning an antique shop or something?
Yes, he had an antique shop on what is 53. Well, would it be 55? 53 runs into 55, and I think it was just beyond 53 going into 55. It was...
well, that's where, I mentioned earlier the White Fence Farm, somewhere in that territory?
Yeah, somewhere in that territory.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And there was an industrial building that I noticed after the antique shop. He had to give up the antique business when he went into service, and his parents didn't want to continue it. But they did kind of continue it on the home base, in our home in Lockport. Not in the home, but we had a shop, a weaving studio. Actually, it was the weaving studio that was used by the local women in Lockport. There were a number of Swedish women that were weaving. And so he had about 6 looms in there, and they came every day and did things in weaving, and he was there to help them and modify patterns for changes, because he could analyze a pattern looking at it and say maybe this would make a difference. And it's not easy to do because it's pretty complicated. Threading a loom is hard work and very time consuming.
Now that building still is still
Well,
there, isn't it?
It was leaning so that I decided to take it down after Bill was at Rock Island, and I wasn't going to rebuild it, but the chimney was still there, so then we put up a building again in its place.
Okay.
But it was the weaving studio for years, but it wasn't really safe to be in the building because the buildings, all the growth of buildings around the area changed the drainage, and I had replaced the floor, and it was sagging again. So we really had to start over.
The topography of Lockport, it's on this hill, all leading to downtown Lockport.
Well, we're on a hill,
right,
but the neighbors all filled in, so
Right.
the water drained into our yard, you see.
So changes had to be made.
Changes had to be
Yeah.
made, otherwise it probably would have stayed.
Yeah. Now you mentioned, let's talk about some of the work and some of the jobs that Bill had before going to APSCA, or what we would call the Joliet Arsenal. One of the interesting things that he did, he was around selling tobacco of some kind? Or?
Yeah, of the Brown and Williamson Company. He decided he needed a job. Well, he was with the crew that built the Argonne lab, and then when the lab was finished, then he was looking for a job again. So in about 1951, he got this job at APSA, but between times, he was with Brown and Williamson. Well, that was in Bloomington. When we were in Bloomington is when he had the Brown and Williamson job, and then he gave it up when we came to Lockport. And then he was looking for work and went to Hanley Company, and then finally to APSA, and that would be in 51.
Yeah. So now, do you recall at all, did he apply for that job at APSCA?
APSA?
APSA?
He did, and being a veteran, he had preference. Veterans at that time were given preference in making application for different jobs, which helped.
Yeah. So the Joliet Arsenal was, just so people can identify with it, so they know that's where
well,
it
they were
was.
very, that whole territory was bought up to support the war effort, you know.
Yeah.
And so it was a lot of people, but then they started downsizing after a few years after the war ended.
Yeah. Well, that would be a few years after the Korean War.
Yeah,
correct?
That's right.
Yeah. And then that actual part that he was in, somewhere when that closed down, correct?
Well, yes, it closed down in '73 totally.
So what happens to Bill now? They close that segment down. Does he retire at that point, or does he move on somewhere else?
He could have. He could have, but he was trying to decide whether to. He was offered a chance to go to Rock Island Arsenal, or he could retire, and it was a difficult decision for him because his home here in Lockport has been his home and his parents' home and his grandparents' home, and it's always been in the family, so it was a very difficult move for him. And all he was going to do in Rock Island was just rent a place and work until he could retire, you know, at age 65. So anyway, he did make the decision to stay with Rock Island, and so he stayed until 1980. So he did another
he rented a home down there.
He went in a single occupancy home with a lot of the other fellows that were going down there, and I didn't. I visited the place, but I didn't see any need to stay there. I had a lot of obligations here, and I had the 4 children in school, and I didn't need anything. I didn't need to break that up.
All right, so the decision is you stay here, the kids stay here, he
Right.
goes there, you're kind of commuting back and forth until he's age 65. When he retired in what, 1980?
In 80.
Something like that from that
It was either 80 or 81. I don't think he could stay past 65. I'm not sure.
What did he do there?
Well, what I remember most is his, he had to relocate nuclear weapons because they couldn't be in the same spot. In other words, they have to be
Keep moving them around.
around. And he was computer trained to handle everything this way.
In those days, those computers were a whole different thing than
They were
are
about a
today,
room
aren't they?
size.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he retires in what year then? 1980?
1980.
81 or something like that?
Roughly there.
Yeah. Does he, just briefly from retirement years, what was he involved in? What did he do during those retirement years?
Well, I think he felt like volunteering, you know, and he went to the senior citizens luncheons and made friends with people there and enjoyed their company, and some of them were veterans, which gave him an outlet, and he seemed to enjoy them. I'm trying to think what else he did.
We're gonna get some help here. Do you hear some help from back there?
He helps serve meals at the Congregational Church.
Meals at Congregational Church?
That's it.
Yeah.
At the Congregational Church. And he loved to assist with things. He liked to be a helper. And so, and I think he did deliver meals for a while to people who were shut-ins. And
that's probably the beginning of that program.
Yes, it was right in the beginning.
It continues to
right.
this very day.
It's still going on, right.
Great. Well, he continued a tradition of service to Lockport, of giving that the Worst family had. And I know we talked about this before, but the house that you live in today, that you and Bill lived in, and then his parents
I've been there 60 years now.
Okay, 60 years for you.
Yeah.
How old is that, the original component of that house?
Well, it's been, it's had little bump outs here and there and additions, but it was built in 1848, I've been told. And it was built, I've also been told that what was the weaving studio was the original home built on that property by his grandparents way back when. Am I saying grandparents or great-grandparents? But it's, this was Henrietta and Jacob.
That would be his grandparents.
Yeah, and they came over from Germany about that time, and they came to Chicago and then came down to Lockport. And so I think that was the original house, and then they built a frame house in front of that, which is the one that we're in now. But then in 1900, Edward inherited it from his mother. His father died in 1989, and she died in 1900, and he was willed the property. And so he proceeded to make changes. He was inspired, I think, by, it's not really, I want to say Frank Lloyd Wright, but there was another fellow prior to him that I think influenced him, and I had that name in my mind, but it's gone right at the moment. But anyway, I have seen some things that he did, and it looks like this was his inspiration.
Great. Well, maybe he was the one before. Maybe he's the individual that preceded Frank Lloyd Wright with the creative architectural design.
He had some really unique ideas about what to do with things. What a brain is all I can say. I didn't get to know him very long because about a year and a half after we were married, he died. And so I had a lot of regard for him. He was very interested in my career, wanted to give me a job, and I says, I have a job.
All right. Well, the story and the saga and the history of Edward F. Worst and Eva transitioning to Bill and Dorothy, and I believe we have captured briefly a bit of that.
Yeah, it's a lot to think about, and those are some highlights. Yeah, it's been a challenge, but a very interesting one, and I still feel challenged.
Well, Dorothy, you're in the Army now. You're really in the Army, and you're not alone, because I believe there's other members of your family who are also serving.
Vernon, he went in ahead of me.
And you had 3 brothers who are in the service?
Yes. The 2 boys that were younger than me, see, there's an age difference about 6 and 8 years between. And so once they were out of high school, then let's see, I think Albert went in at about 42, maybe 43. And he went in the Navy. Rather than being drafted, he decided he would just go in the Navy. So he was, he went into the Navy Air Force. They had an Air Force in the Navy at that time. And what they were going to have him do is land on aircraft, you know, I mean on
Aircraft carrier?
aircraft carriers. And he decided that wasn't his cup of tea. So then he bid to get in the Marines, and he got in. So then he became a Marine pilot. So he flew Corsairs. But I think he spent quite a bit of time in the States, but he did end up in the Pacific. And actually, I heard him talk about being in China, but I haven't heard a lot of conversation about his wartime experience.
But here's the picture, and the vision is that in Waterloo, Iowa, there are how many stars in the window?
4.
4 stars in that neighborhood.
Yeah.
Home in that neighborhood in Waterloo.
Well, in the
4.
bakery especially.
In the bakery.
Yeah, because of the anti-German feeling, you know, there, it wasn't much, but, you know, occasionally people would be.
Sure. Yeah. But there you have 4 of the
Yeah.
of the
And
children
then they would
serving.
say, well, some of your employees, are those, you have employees in service? And Mom was so happy to say, yes, they're my children. And, you know, that really takes care of things.
We bring Dorothy back into
Okay.
into the scene
There's
now.
Albert right now.
And there's Albert, right to your left shoulder there.
Yeah. Boy, he looks young.
7 campaigns, you told me earlier. You were in
Yes.
7 campaigns
Yes.
in World War II.
Right.
That is astonishing,
Yes.
unbelievable, but true.
Yeah.
Take us through some of the memories you have of some of those campaigns.
Well, let's see, I'm at Lincoln Air Base, and I only stayed there a short time. It was, again, just they were starting Air Force bases, you know, around, and it was one of them. And these are kids out of high school. And it was pretty dull in Lincoln, Nebraska, I thought, you know. And so about that time, the Air Force was being separated from the Army because it was all under one command. And Lucille Petrie was my chief nurse, and I told her, I don't want to, I want to stay Army. She says, well, then you're going to have to leave. And I says, and I will. So I gave her a request for overseas assignment. And by December, I had my assignment. And I was sent to Camp Kilmer in New Jersey. And I was there for Christmas and January. And then in early February, we got our assignment for the 11th of VAC. A bunch of us were at Camp Kilmer. And we got acquainted with each other, and we were drilled we had to gather every morning in the assembly room with our bedroll, and everything had to be shown what we were going to take. And we didn't know if that was the day we would leave or if we could go back to general duty in the hospital. And this went on for a few weeks, and then one morning they said, okay, roll it up and you can start marching. And so we marched to a place where we got on a train, and they took us into New York Harbor, and from early morning until about dark, we were in process of getting aboard a ship, but we finally got aboard that ship. And
where was your final destination?
we didn't know for quite a while, but we guessed that we were going to be in some Arabic country because we had Arabic lessons every day on the ship for about an hour.
That would be a clue.
Yeah, that was a clue. But we had no idea, but we did notice that from horizon to horizon, we were part of a convoy. And then I found out later that it was the largest one to date that had ever crossed. It happened to be this American Expeditionary Force that was going in to kind of come in the weak area in terms of the German and Italian axis. In other words, they felt that we could do better. I have read up on it that we were going to eliminate the forces in Africa. And so we landed at Rabat. Well, we didn't land at Rabat. We landed at Casablanca. And our hospital had already gone in 2 months earlier without nurses because this is in 42. See, we were just getting into the war because we declared war in December 41, and in the second week of November 42, the Expeditionary Force went in. That was the one, and then we were the follow-up, and we came in I think around the 1st of March.
Okay. What was your reception like, the nurses coming into that area?
Well,
because I recall a story you telling me earlier.
Yeah, the hospital was set up in the Sultan's racetrack in Rabat, which was very nice, a grandstand, and they had the surgery set up underneath the grandstand so that they were in a nice, secure area, and they had tents set up in the middle of the racetrack for the hospital. It was a 400-bed tent hospital, and so they threw up some small wall tents for the nurses because there were 48 of us, and there were no lights in them. We arrived in the middle of the night. Our luggage didn't come with us, and we just kind of groped around, and we could feel a cot, and there were some blankets on it, 3 blankets on a cot, and by morning we were frozen because we didn't know how to keep warm with 3 blankets because there's a strange thing in that area, and apparently all along the northern coast of Africa, is that the days are extremely warm and the nights are extremely cold, very cold. Well, we were taught that you have to cocoon them, you know, 1/3, and the second one, you know, and then you slither in through the top, and that's how you keep warm. But we figured it out. But anyway, when we got up in the morning, Helena Lola was our chief nurse, and she asked us to go to the grandstand and that Colonel Scott would meet with us. And so we were in full uniform. We had been issued uniforms before we went overseas. Until then, we did not have the military style. But they were World War I uniforms. They didn't have them yet for... the wax hadn't been organized, nothing like that, so that we just had a navy blue jacket, which we called a blouse, and a royal blue skirt. And they couldn't fit me with the shoes. I have an unusual foot, long and narrow, and they didn't come in my size, so I could wear my own shoes. But anyway, we were in full dress, and we've got a picture somewhere of all of us up there in the grandstand, and the chief nurse and Colonel Scott. And he addresses us and tells us that we are not welcome. He had been with the 11th Abac in World War I, and also they were activated when early on. They were at Camp Robinson and out in Indio, California, getting ready for this assignment for many months. And they didn't have a nurse, and they felt qualified to take care of anything that happened, and they didn't need us. We were nothing but trouble. So he let it be known that that's what we were, and he was pretty sure we wouldn't last long and we would be gone, and he had some pretty good suggestions.
He had some recommendations for the men in regard to
yes,
the nurses.
and he said there'll be no fraternization, and anybody who does, they will be relieved of command here, and they'll be sent to the infantry.
Yeah, this guy down the line becomes a general, but he gets his lesson quite early.
Yes.
On the necessity of using nurses.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, this there's another story, and then we'll move on to maybe Angio or another campaign. But there's another interesting story that sort of kind of defines you a bit in those days, and that is you hitch a ride. You decide to go to see some ruins or go to Morocco or someplace. How did you get there?
Well, you know, there's always mail collecting at certain points, but you have to send somebody in a Jeep to go get it. And I think this was probably the one at Palermo or something like that. That's when I was in Sicily. And
well, I thought this was the Piper Cub.
oh, the Piper
flight.
Cub. Oh,
yeah, I'm
right.
talking about that one
Right,
because you're
that
still
one.
in.
Okay, well, it was the same place. Yeah, this was at Civitavecchia in.
Okay, so that was Italy. Okay.
That was in
All right, we'll
Sicily.
move to Italy. Let's go to Italy. It's a
well,
it's
this
a
is
nice country.
This is Sicily.
In Sicily's the okay. We'll go to Sicily.
This was
Let's
Sicily.
go there.
Yeah, yeah. We the small planes were always flying overhead and taking off and landing, and they were very generous about letting us ride along. You know, there was always room for one person in there, and I knew the island pretty well because I could almost tell you which direction we were going and what was underneath us, you know. But I got the notion that I wanted to see a very dear friend of mine who was stationed in Egypt. And so I put in a request to the commanding officer. And my chief nurse had to okay it, and she thought I was crazy. She says, "They aren't giving passes." And I says, "Well, I can test, can't I?" Well, I already knew they were giving passes. The grapevine, I knew that they had just started passes. And I thought, well, I'm going to take advantage of it. So I presented it then to the commanding officer, and it was approved. And so I had a 5-day pass. And so I went to, I hitched a ride with one of the pilots, you know, to go to Catania, which was the big airport on the island over on the eastern end. And when we landed, they were waiting for me to get back aboard, and I says, "I'm not going back." And they said, "You can't do that." And I said, "Yes, I can. I've got a pass." So anyway, I went, it was mostly British, so I went to the British station, you know, for flights. It was their quarters. And they weren't even civil to me. They, of course, couldn't do anything for me. So they said, "Well, there's the American thing. Maybe they can help you out." So I went the way they directed me. And as soon as I got in there, there was only one person in there. And he says, "Where do you want to go?" I says, "Well, what's flying?" Or words to that effect. I said, "I want to go to Egypt." He says, "Well, how would you like to go to Bari?" And that was in Italy. So
you took off to Bari, Italy.
yeah. So he said, "Well, okay." And so I wondered what would happen. But anyway, there was one of these, he had a counter, and it was a lift counter. So he lifts that up, and takes off. And we get in a Jeep, and we go for about 5 miles. Well, it seemed like 5 miles. Maybe it was only 1 mile. But anyway, I didn't see anything, and I didn't see a plane. And I thought, where are we going? And then we see a plane. And so he pulls up beside the steps to go up, and he says, "This is it." So I got aboard, and the only person on board was one of the medical officers from my unit back in Rabat. And he was the one that got reassigned for fraternizing. So we had a nice visit, but the pilot didn't come on for a little while, maybe an hour, maybe half hour.
Some of the folks who are watching this DVD right now, depending on who you are and what year you're watching, some of you may have memories of a show called MASH. Others may not. May I suggest that you go into the archives and take a look at that series called MASH, because that's where I want to kind of bring you back into the MASH units that you served in.
It would have been called a MASH if they had invented the word, because it's medical something.
Yeah.
I don't know what the acronym stands for, but
Well,
it
in those
stands
days
for,
it wasn't MASH. It was something
it was.
different.
We were just the
Forerunners of what MASH would be.
we were called the 11th Evacuation Hospital Semi-Mobile. We had to be ready to go as soon as they said, we need you, things are moving, and we would get the word to finish what surgery we were doing. And we had more than surgery patients, but I was in surgery. So we'd finish up what we had to do, we'd evacuate patients, and we were on the road. And we were semi-mobile because we had enough trucks to take half of the unit, and surgery and shock ward and a few of the patient tents were in the first section, and then they came back and got the rest of the hospital, and we were intact usually the same day.
Describe the typical arena that you operated in. What did that whole thing look like? What did the room look like? What were the conditions like?
Well, it was a tent, and it was a large tent, and it held 8 sawhorses, like a carpenter has. Well, it actually had 16 because you needed a set for each table. And the first 5, as you would come in from shock ward into the surgery, the first 5 setups were for the shorter cases, and the last 3 were for the ones that could take hours, because we didn't want traffic around them. But that was the surgery. And then the patient tents were cots, about 40 cots per tent, and they were side by side in a double row. And there was nothing but blankets, no pillows, no sheets. We didn't have time or space or facilities to handle anything white.
Yeah. Let me go back to the description of these carpenter setups.
Oh,
that you
right.
had.
And then the patient would come by ambulance. There were no helicopters. They came by ambulance, and as far as you could see, we would know something had happened because all the ambulances were coming up the road, and we had, John, can't come up with his name, John Howard, he was in charge of the group that would assess the patients and determine whether they were critical and needed to get immediate attention or would keep a while.
So
then they would
triage kind of.
It was a triage. So he would arrange for that, and they would go into shock ward. Initially, it was a small one. Eventually, it was a huge one.
Yeah.
And then they came on a litter. The litter, when they were ready to go into surgery, they were simply put on the sawhorses, and in the shock ward, they kept them on the litter on a cot. The more you move a person, the more you're going to lose them. So they never came off of that litter or stretcher, if you want to call it that, until sometimes they stayed on it for the whole time they were in the hospital.
Amazing, amazing. If we have a tent, was it anywhere near sterile conditions there?
Oh, yeah.
How did you do that?
We had autoclaves in the surgery. I mean, we had a little separate tent where we did the autoclaving, and we could do cleanups, and we had 5-gallon water cans, which was our water supply, and we had those everywhere because we were always needing water. And for sterile water, we autoclaved the water. And then we didn't give a lot of blood, but we used an awful lot of plasma. Yeah. We used that primarily instead of blood. And I do know some of our people were donors, direct donors for blood.
Yeah, sure. What did you use, or did you use anything to heat those tents? What did you use?
It was called a pot-belly stove. It's a round little stove with a stack that goes through a hole in the tent. And I'm trying to think what we were throwing in it, but
Very charcoal or something?
charcoal probably, but I can remember picking up dry wood for our tents because that's all the heat we had too. We didn't need a stove in the summer, but in the winter,
You did.
we spent a very cold winter in the mountains of Italy in 44 to 45.
You had a roommate who was with you for many of these campaigns,
Yes.
too. Millie, I believe her name
Millie, yeah, Millie
is? So
Wells.
the two of you went through all of this together?
Yes, from beginning to end. She picked me for to be her roommate. I started out with B. Zentmeyer, and she decided, she and another girl, they had similar interests. They decided to go together, but even before that, Millie mentioned that we should be roommates, and so worked out fine. And we had the tent right next to the chief nurse the whole time, which had a little advantage too.
Oh, it did it?
Yeah, a little advantage.
Now, what is the story? Did you meet this gentleman I'm about to mention, or did you see him? Douglas Fairbanks? What is that story about Douglas Fairbanks?
Well, this is in Italy. We're in Naples, and Naples, we didn't make the invasion from Sicily into Italy in September. We didn't come in until January. Other people managed to do all that, so that when we arrived in Naples, it was pretty tame, you know. And one of the, well, in fact, the very first person that I met when I landed in Rabat was when my first roommate, and she loved planes, anything to do with flying. She was a flyer. She had a license, so she was very interested. Anyway, she knew there was an airport nearby. We could hear it, so we went over, and there was a pilot in the plane. The motor propeller's going, it's noisy as can be, and we're yelling and talking to him, and he's yelling back, and pretty soon somebody tapped us, and here it is. I think it was either Colonel or General Immel. I know he became a general, but I don't know when he became one. But anyway, he said, this fellow's got to take off, you know. You got to quit leave him alone. So we backed off. Anyway, he was the one who was the in charge of the Naples area. In other words, he was the American commander for Naples. And when he found out the 11th of Act was nearby, why, he contacted us and said, I'm having a dinner, and I would like you to round up 4 or 5 nurses and come join us. And so he sent a vehicle for us, I think a command car or something. And we went to his place, and it was where the nice places are, high up on the hill in Naples, you know, where all the pretty lush places are. And we went in and had a very lovely dinner. And sitting next to me is, I think, Captain, who did I say?
Douglas Fairbanks?
Douglas Fairbanks. He was the captain of a PT boat, and he had docked in Naples Harbor and contacted Immel. And so Immel decides to give him a nice treat. And so he has this huge, lovely party. And it was all 11th of Act nurses, there were about 5 of us. And he was my dinner partner.
Oh.
And for those of you watching, again, go to the archives and look up Douglas Fairbanks.
Yeah.
Not Douglas Fairbanks Jr., but Douglas Fairbanks.
Oh, it was Junior.
Was it Junior? Okay.
Oh, it was Junior.
Douglas
No, his
Fairbanks
father
Jr.
was married to Mary Pickford. And Mary Pickford was his second wife and not Douglas's mother.
Right.
And that's all he talked about, was Mary Pickford. He just thought the world of her. And of course I do too, so we enjoyed talking about Mary Pickford.
Well, thinking of the world of people and romance and marriage, let's go from military life to discovering someone by the name of Edward. How did this take place?
You're talking about William.
William, I'm sorry.
William. Well, I was working in Bloomington
This is after the war.
after the war. I took the GI Bill to become a public health nurse, you know.
Oh, okay.
So I went to Minnesota U and got my degree in public health nursing, and then I decided to go to Bloomington to, public health was very popular because of the need for healthy young men to go to war. You know, they found that out when they were recruiting and drafting men, that they'd been through the Depression and they weren't in the best shape, but there was a big drive for that, so that's why I was public health. And I thought it was a good idea anyway. But anyway, now
How did you meet your husband?
My partner I had a date, and she had been married to Bill Wurst, but he was he had come into town, and he was going to...
so he was her ex.
Her ex,
okay.
Yeah. And she said, you know, I have a dilemma. I have a date tonight. It was with the man she eventually married, you know. But anyway, she said, would you take him off my hands?
And you did.
So she gave him my address, and he came by. And the interesting thing is, I really should bring this in because I was a little startled when I saw him. He had on a light brown fedora, and he had in a full-length coat, and he looked like something out of the past, you know. But he was very charming and easy to talk to, and we had one thing in common. He had been in all the places I had been in the war, and we just talked war and compared notes about things.
What year was this?
This was in 48. I met him in February of 48.
And from February of 48 to when does he ask the question?
Well, it was probably that night or the next time
Really?
you saw him. And then I only saw him on weekends because he was over in some place in Illinois on the border with Indiana, and I was in Bloomington, so he had a long drive. But anyway, he would ask every weekend, and we made a joke of it. And I would say, well, you've got a cold, or I've got a cold, or this is coming up, or that's coming up. And then finally this crazy thought came in my head, you know, May Day, that's the day of disasters and stuff. I said, okay.
May Day.
So we got married on May Day.
That's right.
Well, great. Now tell us about the wedding. You got married on May Day.
Yeah, well, we had to find a minister to do it, and I wanted a Lutheran minister, so because those were the only ones I'd ever known. And his name was Hohenstein or something like that. I thought, that's a good German name. I didn't know the man at all. But anyway, somehow or other his father found out that he was getting married, and he came down from Lockport, and he was standing outside of the, we got married in a church, but it was just Edward Wurst, his father, and Louis and Helen, his son and daughter-in-law. They had brought him down, and those were the only people besides us in the church. And I didn't go to any special trouble, except that he insisted I wear heels, and I can't walk in heels, but I put them on long enough to get through the ceremony and took them off again.
So it's the Worst family who lives in Lockport, and that's how you arrive in Lockport.
Right, right. And so then I had an apartment with a friend of mine who was also a public health nurse. And so we moved in with Mrs. Whitson from Normal, Illinois, who was a lovely lady. We shared her home. She had this English bull who was the most gentle animal. He was huge, but just a slobbery, loving dog. And, well, we lived with her until his father died. His father died then in the following February. And so we moved back to Lockport because his sister and he inherited the house, and she couldn't take it. So we moved in, and I've been here ever since.
Yeah, so you've been in that same house since what year?
Since I would say about March or February of 48, 49.
49. And how old do you think the house is itself?
Well, the core of the house, the original house, was a frame house, and it was built in about 1848. Yeah. And then Edward, who inherited it in 1900 from his parents, put on additions and made a few changes that have just really made it a rather large, rambling house.
And it's a beautiful home today.
With
a few additions to it.
Oh, yes. It's never been moved out of, and it's got a lot of stuff in it.
Well, surrounding you in the living room here as members of your family. Mm-hmm. And what I'd like to do is we continue to turn the pages of the Worst family history. Mm-hmm. Is to I'm going to ask each one of you if you have a question for Mom, and if you do, great. And then as we go to, and we'll start with you, Sally. Tell me about your family, okay?
My family?
Yeah, but do you have a question? Is anything? Have we left anything out? You want to go back to?
Clarification?
Oh, not at this moment.
Okay.
I might,
Okay.
throw a few
right.
things in.
Tell us about your family.
Okay. I have 2 children,
And their names?
Jesse and Michelle. Jesse's the older,
And how old is Jesse?
35,
Yeah.
and Michelle is just turned 30.
Okay. Right. And are they married?
Jesse's married
Yeah.
to Michelle, another Michelle. So it gets a little confusing. Jesse's wife is a redhead, so she's nicknamed Red, and my daughter's a blonde. So to clear the confusion, we go by Red or Blondie, because we got 2 Michelle Rowlands now.
Right.
And my son's married, has 3 children, and they're 8, 7, and 6.
Wow.
Yes.
Great.
2 boys and then a daughter.
And you still live here in Lockport?
Yeah,
Correct.
I'm on the next block.
Okay.
We're all very close.
We're in walking distance.
Within
everyone.
walking distance.
Yes.
Okay, Sally.
Yes.
And then there's, I believe there's Cindy is right next to you. And do you have a question that anything that comes to mind that we may have forgotten along? I mean, there's a lot of material that, we're not able to bring in within the time we have here, but is there a question that I forgot?
If I thought of it at the time, it hasn't come
It's
back
gone
to me
now.
right now.
Okay. Your family.
I'm married to Skip for 38 years, and we live in the house of our dreams now here in Lockport, right next to my mother. And my daughter lives on the corner next to me, so we've got our own little compound here. My sister only lives a block away. I have, Skip and I have a daughter, Heather, And she has been married, she's divorced right now, but she has a 14-year-old son, so I have a grandson, and he's like the greatest kid in the world.
And how old is the grandson?
14.
14, okay.
I work at Silver Cross, have all my life. It's the only job I've ever had. I'm systems coordinator for maternal child.
All right. And you do have a beautiful home, and we're actually shooting part of this DVD here for you right here in the lower level, the studio of your home. And your husband Skip is a producer of this program, so we want to thank him and you for your hospitality as well. And traveling in here for over on Bruce Road in Lockport comes Sandra. And I'll ask you the same thing, Sandra. Any question come to mind that maybe I've forgotten to ask Mom?
The only thing I want to do is get a little clarification on all the schools that she's attended. That's from grade school, even the one you went in Germany, through colleges. And if you went to Circle Campus, all the ones all the way up from grade school up, this country and Germany. Just the names of them.
You want to know all of my
Every school.
education?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, I mentioned the Lutheran school, and then I went to public high school, and then I went to nursing, and then I went to Drake, and then went to war, and then I went to Minnesota U, and I graduated from Minnesota U. Oh, you want me to mention my school in Germany?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Back in 1926, my dad sent Mom and all of us kids back to Germany because he didn't think she would survive in America. And he was going to follow as soon as possible. And so he kept it to himself, but he had enough money finally and had everything arranged. He bought a place in Bremen, Germany. And my mother's aunt had an apartment in it, and she was a podiatrist. And we arrived in Germany in September of 26. And she hadn't seen my mother since they'd left in 1914 with the 3 kids. And for her to come back with 7 was a little overwhelming for her. But anyway, my mom hadn't been there more than maybe a month, maybe less than that, when she realized it had been a very huge mistake to come back. Germany had changed. Things were still very rough. You remember they had that terrible problem with financial failures in Germany. The Versailles Treaty eliminated they had to pay reparations to everybody who was in the war, and they had nothing. Their economy just went down, and there was a lot of a bad attitude throughout the country, and it was quite evident where we were living. And so she told my dad to hang on to whatever he hadn't sold, that we'd be back, and it would take a while. And of course they weren't, they were still German citizens, and it appeared to be a problem, but my mother's aunt was able to resolve that in some way. She knew the right people, and eventually we came back, and we came back in the spring. I think it was, I was back in school in May at home, but I really missed 5th grade altogether. I never had 5th grade because in Germany, my mother put us all in school the day after we arrived, and we boarded ship that day. We didn't go to school, and that was it. So it was a good experience for me, and probably the 2 younger boys, and possibly my older brothers, but I think it was a disaster for my sister and Otto, because they were high school, and there is no high school education. It is not public education. And of course, they had the language problem because they'd been away for so long. So it really took a big chunk out of their lives and set them back because they never finished high school, either one of them.
Because of that.
Because of that.
Sandra, did you have a follow-up?
Oh, I was just wondering if she remembered the names of the schools that she went to.
The name of the school?
What was
Well,
name
the
of
one in
school
Germany was Rosenkranz
And what city?
in Bremen.
In Bremen.
It was a girls' school.
Okay. What
And
about-
2 of my brothers, they went to a boys' school. I don't remember the name of it, but I know they played soccer, and they seemed to enjoy school. They made a lot of friends. I made a lot of friends, but we were at the age where you make a lot of friends. Well, my sister is 16, and there was it just was impossible for her. What she did is kind of was my mother's assistant. And then the 2 little ones, they were preschoolers, and they were put in a nursery. And they were in every day. They went to the nursery, and because this is a service that's there, just like in France, you know, they make it possible for women to have a little relief from
Sure.
that. And that was evident then, and it was good for the babies, and it was good for them.
For Mom.
Yeah. And you see, my aunt there, my mother's aunt that is, we called her Tunnebrame because we named her after the city. But her name was Lena Flechman. But she had, she was a widow, and she learned to be a podiatrist after her husband died, and he died very young. So my dad was instrumental in helping her get her education and that was why there was a nice connection there.
Well, it was good that you left Bremen because that was one of the towns that was heavily bombed in World War II.
Well, I took a picture of the house in August of '45. I managed to get up to Bremen, and I went down to Moralstrasse, and I took a picture of it. I mailed it to my mother, and then she knew what happened. It was burned out totally. The whole area was burned out. It was incendiary bombing, and if we had stayed, we would not be here.
Right. Sandra, your family.
My husband's Gilbert. We were married in 1980, so we got almost 28 years. I have a daughter, Sarah. She has a child, Kaylee. Kaylee just turned 11 months old yesterday. Only have the one child. That's pretty
Well,
much
we saw Kaylee earlier.
Yeah.
Beautiful child.
Thank you. Her mom came and picked her up.
What do you do for a living?
I'm a manufacturing engineer at KVH Industries in Tinley Park.
Okay, good. All right. And how long have you been with them?
24 years.
24 years. All right. Okay. All right. Well, we're going to turn the attention to the male of the family here. Mark, questions for Mom that we forgot? Or
Maybe something about you got a ring from the Pope overseas.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
That's a
yeah.
good
a
one.
ring from the Pope, and we
No.
forgot to ask you that. Tell me that story.
Well, when we were in Rome, you know, when the Italian campaign, you know, just collapsed pretty fast, but the fighting continued above Rome. But Rome was okay, and so everybody was seeing Rome and enjoying everything, and so there was a trip into the Vatican, you know, and I took the trip, and we went into where the Pope receives people, and I was the only woman in this whole assembly room, just loaded with soldiers, you know, military. And the, I have trouble with names, but anyway, the Pope's, I wish I could think of that name. They're in costume. They're in this ancient costume.
The guards?
The guards, but there's a name for them which escapes me at the moment. Anyway, they wormed their way through. They worked their way through, and then they came to me and they invited me to follow them. So, and they put me right at the foot of the dais.
The Swiss guards.
Swiss guards. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Boy, Anyway, and I kind of wondered about it. And then I see the Swiss Guards carrying the litter that he rides in, this big thing, all decorated. And they bring it up and put him on the dais. And he gets off. And he comes right over to me and hands his ring finger to me. I had no idea what I was supposed to do. But at the same time, he handed me a medal, I think. I've given it away since, so I have nothing to be sure. But it was something he gave me, a memento. But anyway, everybody had grabbed his hand since I wasn't going to get it to kiss. If I wasn't going to kiss the ring, everybody was in there, and they were just crowded around me. But it was Pope Pius XII, and I thought it was a very nice experience.
And all the, if there are Catholics in the family watching, there are millions of Catholics who just wish one day that they would have that opportunity.
Yes,
and you got that opportunity.
But it took me by surprise. If someone had just prepared me. But you see, my escort was also Lutheran, and he didn't know any more than I did.
Well, it's probably a great memory, I'm sure.
Yes,
and
yes.
I'm glad Mark
Yeah.
brought that up.
And I don't know if he's still around, but he's from North Dakota, and his name was Wilson F. Nepperud. Now, isn't that a name? Mm-hmm. But he's from somewhere in North Dakota. I have no idea where. But
well, there's only two types of religions in North Dakota: the Lutherans and the Catholics. So
yeah, yeah. But he was a fine fellow.
Good. Well, Mark, tell us about your family.
Well, I'm single, so there's no family.
Well, you have
two
you
dogs.
have friends. Are you also a resident of Lockport, by the way?
Yes, always Lockport.
Okay. Well, now you have family here. Tell us some things about the family who are gathered right here. You know, some stories of your sisters.
Tell them how they got on your case all the while you were growing up, being the youngest.
Well, I remember Sally was a feisty one. Cindy was
We all
kind
agree on
of
that.
the study one, and Sandra's the in-between one. But she got, did a little bit of both, but it was...
Who got picked on the most?
I did. But I think they confused things. I remember they used to get things that I thought I should have got. But I think they got clothes one day, and I got jealous of the fact they all got clothes, probably from relatives.
Sure.
Because girls got more than guys.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So I wanted stuff too, but they were laughing that I wanted dresses. I said, not dresses. I was thinking
See,
I wanted...
they all got an Easter dress and an Easter bonnet and things, everything to be special for Easter. And then he says, where's mine?
Well, I remember we got one Easter, all three of us girls got a gray outfit. They all matched.
Polka dot.
And it had a little cape with white polka dots on it. You were crying because you didn't get one.
Well, not a dress.
He
I wanted...
He wanted clothes. He was
I-
upset because he
I
didn't.
got left out of anything.
Mark-
He wanted his outfit.
His outfit. But he was like 2 years old, maybe a year old at
Well,
the
he
time.
was supposed to be taken to Robert Hall.
Right,
Well-
exactly.
Well, we
With a
straightened
Easter
him
suit.
out real fast.
Too much.
It's probably from Flo, right? Was it from Flo, or where'd the clothes come from?
No, I think Mom bought them. They were Easter dresses for us.
I bought them.
Oh,
Because you had the dress that went with it.
Yeah.
You had the mother dress. It was mother-daughter
Yeah.
dresses.
Yes,
Well,
I
great,
remember that.
great memories, and I'm sure there's many more. And as we draw to getting closer to the end here, why don't we'll start with Mark, and then we'll end up
Okay.
with you.
All right.
It's just some memories of your childhood in Lockport. Anything that comes to mind? Just
What about
yeah, probably all the
your
little...
mother wears
Army boots.
Well, that's something
Army
later,
boots.
but I think earlier on, it just, as kids growing up, we had like homes that were converted to stores, I guess, or candy stores. I guess older people, for maybe supplementing their income, they would just convert the living room into like a little candy store. So we'd just go down the street, and they'd go into, knock on a door and go inside, and it'd be, what was it, on 18th Street in Hamilton, on top of a hill. There
Across the
was...
street from Taft.
Well, by Taft School, there was a store, and there was another one that kind of, the guy would scare us. He looked like, I think he was single,
Is
but
it
he's real
tall?
tall, dressed in black, skinny. I mean, very like a skeleton look. But he would primarily just sell us candy. He didn't have any like groceries in there. But
The
we
candy
had
store. A lot of neighborhoods and
Yeah.
cities all over had.
Yeah, just-
they call them like school stores, where they're always located.
and
near
it was
the
actually
stores.
within their living or their house.
Yeah.
And it was maybe Truman's was the most popular because it was right next to our house. So we'd go there,
And it was a real store.
and it's a real store,
Yeah.
small, and Truman would be smoking his pipe. And his daughter, I knew her, Susan Knutson. She was the one that was so skinny. Didn't she used to slip between the shelves and hide?
I don't remember.
I think you were telling me that. She used to like,
Susie?
yeah, Susie.
Yeah, she was thin.
But it was, our favorite time, I think, was Halloween because that's when Truman would bring in all the paraphernalia, all that stuff that had to do with like wax lips,
Halloween candy stuff, yeah.
all that candy stuff, something that would be, you could chew it after you played it. It was like a little accordion.
Yeah.
And I think dots were on a piece of paper, just little candy.
Was
But
it
they-
all penny candy?
Yeah,
Even 2 for a penny.
Uh-huh.
2 for a penny.
And that's the
Never
thing we used to do.
again.
We used to get into my dad's Indian head pennies, and we used to take those in and get,
Oh, he had
candy.
a big jar full of Indian head pennies.
yeah.
Had.
Yeah.
We spent
And-
most of them.
Truman had a store just behind us,
He got most of them.
Yeah.
and he got nearly all of them because I didn't go in that little alcove where it was stored. And one day when I was in there, I thought, where'd they go?
We wanted gum.
And he never once said a word to me about it.
No.
Memories for you?
Well, the big thing I remember is when we were little children, would walk. It seemed like it was a long distance away. It was Delwood Park. We'd pack a lunch or a little bag, and you'd take this long walk to Delwood Park because they had a big, they had a ride that looked like almost like a little triangle and had a round seat, and you'd sit on it. It was a big pole in the middle. But instead of going around a circle, we would take the ride and we would push it into the pole and
make
just
a
keep
loud noise.
slam it. We would put somebody in the middle, and they would actually hang on the pole as this little thing was slamming.
It was a deadly ride.
And we didn't use it the proper way, but
Anybody get hurt?
No,
no, but
sure
that was a big
was.
thing. You'd walk down there and you'd go in the swings, you'd walk to the park, or you'd walk Dead Man's Cave. That was the big thing. You'd sneak underneath there and go in there. Or the
I've
little
heard
school,
more
Taft
stories
School, also
recently
had
than I
a
ever knew
parking lot
before.
back there where they had a bunch of
Yeah.
little swings and stuff to go play on, and athletic field, but that was always fun. Everywhere they had swings or slides and such, but
Sure.
that's pretty much all gone. You don't really have a lot of parks or schools with playground stuff. But that was something I thought was fun.
Used to entertain the neighborhood. Used to do ballet outside
Oh, yeah.
and play records.
We'd put on a show.
We put on shows,
For the
puppet
neighborhood.
shows.
Oh,
Well, it
And
was like
concerts,
Spanky and
'cause I
our
played
gang. You'd
clarinet.
watch that stuff and you
Yeah.
thought you could do your own little
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
was
thing
a
and
Cookie
sell-
Put
Lemmy
up
or
a
Cone.
curtain.
Yeah.
We played that little
Music.
record from Route 77 or 77 Sunset Strip.
oh,
We'd
I
charge
like those
admission.
old records.
Oh,
It was a
Evelyn, put
sitcom
your
on TV.
Devlin. We played that thing till it broke. Remember that one?
Yeah.
Oh, my
Evelyn
God.
from
We did
Pom
puppet
Pom.
shows, and
Yeah.
we'd
Yeah,
entertain
that
the
was
neighborhood. Even though women,
It was headquarters
women weren't
for
working
all
then,
the
they would
kids in
come
the
by,
neighborhood.
remember, bring their kids that weren't at school. And it must have been summertime because we weren't in school doing it.
Well, we
I
played
just-
instruments too, so we put on a show.
Who played the instruments? You played saxophone, you said?
Clarinet.
Clarinet?
Saxophone.
Cindy?
Sax, oboe.
Clarinet, saxophone, oboe.
Clarinet.
Clarinet for you. Mark?
Cornet.
Cornet? Wow. You were a musical family.
We
Kinda
didn't,
like
we didn't say we were
the-
good at it. We just played.
Mom liked my playing the best.
Of course, you're the favorite daughter. Sydney, memories.
We just did a lot outside. It's a lot outside. I mean, all summer long we were playing tag or we were playing war.
Yeah,
we
we
knew
were
all the
outdoors.
kids in the neighborhood. We were playing football. We were playing baseball. I mean,
Remember
in the
chips
street
on
all the
windows?
time. Maybe some windows got broken. I'm not sure, but
Catch fireflies.
Yeah.
Tiny
and when
move
we weren't doing stuff like that, Mom would always schedule stuff. Like we had camps. We would go to Cheney Pool was always open. You could ride a bus to Cheney Pool.
The
I
bus
just-
stopped
we were-
right across from our house.
We were not in the house, but when we were in
And
the house
anybody
for
in
weather
Lockport had
reasons,
to get on there.
we would play games. We would play Monopoly, just board games. Board games were big.
Well, you used the dining room table for ping pong.
Oh, and Barbie and
Yeah,
Ken
ping
and all
pong,
that stuff.
Barbie, yeah.
We just,
We can
I just
extend
remember
it.
knowing everybody in the neighborhood and being outside, you know, when the weather was nice a lot.
Right.
You didn't come in till it was dark.
Yeah.
You had to force them in.
Well, you've been writing notes down here. You must
I
have
know.
all kinds of things.
I'm writing pretty
But,
big.
but Cindy, by the way, do you have a? Did I ask you if you had a question? I forgot. Did I ask you if you have a question for Mom?
Let me think about it. While
Okay, you're
you
still
were
thinking
gonna
about
think
it.
about it.
Okay,
I do.
so it's your turn. I know you've got about 8 or 9 down there. Go right ahead.
Question for Mom. What was your mom's full name? Your dad's full name?
Oh, she had a lot of middle names, and I don't know if I remember them all, but her first name was Rudolphina because her father's name was Rudolph. And then it was, I think, Teresa Dorte,
Charlotta.
something, and then her last name
Charlotta.
was Plaisir. And it made her very subject to problems at school because the French and the German weren't very friendly. And they thought that was a French name, which it was, but her father was really German, but his name was Plaisir. And so she mentioned that to me a few times, so it must have been important.
What's Grandpa's name?
And Grandpa's full name?
Oh, well, it was Carl with a K, but it went to a C once he got over here. And it was Carl Friedrich Heinrich Christian Webeking.
Okay. Then Aunt Clara's. Do you know her full name? Aunt Clara? Her middle names?
I don't think I ever saw it.
No? Betty's?
Well, they go with the name of Chowning. It's Elizabeth Chowning, and then of course she was a Worst, and then she's a Musgrave. And she was a very good artist,
Yeah.
very good.
Yeah, she taught art in school. And it's something I like to do. is to
And
paint
she likes art.
a lot. And childhood things, I was looking here at some of these photos coming up, and I always hated to look at me in the ballerina suit because we had ballet and tap when we were kids, and horse lessons, all 4 of us. We started out with Western and found out that was bad news because you sit in the saddle and just bounce your guts all over the place, so we took English. And that's what my daughter actually has been doing since she was 2 years old. First time she's
Cindy,
been on a horse.
Cindy
put
put
her
her
on
on,
my horse.
on
Right.
the horse at 2, and she's been a horse nut ever since.
Yeah, she has a horse, but she, well, it's costly to compete, but she's a hunter jumper and does dressage. But she bought a young horse, trained it herself, and she does really good when she shows. But the ballet picture, when I saw it up there, I was like, oh no, you know, because we were all little skinny.
You get it for me. We all have spindle
We're all
legs.
going to see that picture.
I know. It's getting a little better now
really, really
because
skinny.
I don't mind being skinny if I can get back to that.
Any other memories come back?
You've never had that problem.
Well, we were little scrappers, and I remember we had 50 million babysitters, lots of babysitters. Some were good, some were not, but I'm not going there.
I went to work rather early on account of it was important to have a little money coming in.
Right, yeah.
And where did you work now in Lockport, when you were here in Lockport?
I worked in Joliet at Silver Cross Hospital.
Okay.
I started out part-time, and then when I could work it out, I went full-time. And I started out in 56.
Yeah, that sounds
56. And
So that was at the original hospital, not with all the additions to it,
yeah.
right?
And then I saw all the additions, and I know we need a new place because it's really something. But anyway, the final, I retired in January of 82, and I started in January of 56, 56.
In 1956.
So it's roughly 26 years.
Right. and I need to do a little something for genealogy.
Okay.
Okay. I grew up at Worst, and in '72 I got married, and I was a Rowland, and his name was James Rowland, and he died in '88, and I remarried in '05 to Chris Birkbeck, a wonderful gentleman from England, and we're very happy.
That's great.
Well, that's
Amen.
nice.
Amen. Good genealogy.
Right.
Any memories that stand out of Lockport and the downtown that it's a little bit different today than it was in
Well,
the 50s and 60s and 70s?
Cookies.
It's changed a lot. And I kind of liked it small and quiet. And I know the bridge is out now, but, and it's a nuisance. However, it is so much quieter, which is nice.
Well, and your home really is, and I will just tell you this, the grandchildren and great-grandchildren and grandnephews and nieces, whoever watching this, is that it's such a beautiful residential area that these homes are located. It would remind you, if in fact you get a chance to come up, or you should, hopefully it will not have changed much, but it is a neighborhood. And in the world that we live in today, those are disappearing
Yes, yeah.
from society, neighborhoods. And I think Lockport, good, bad, or indifferent, has its neighborhood. And
Yes,
that
it-
has continued, even though it expands.
Oh.
Talk about Lockport, not Homer Glen, but at Lockport.
The main section.
Right.
I like it very much. I'm very content where I am.
Right.
It took me a little while to adjust, but I made it, and now I wouldn't change anything.
Now, Dorothy, there's a camera to my left shoulder. You have a minute.
Okay.
If you would like to say something for those folks who'll be watching this DVD 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now.
Well, I would say if you have a chance, it would be worthwhile to visit Lockport. I'm sure it's going to continue to grow, but it seems to be a good place to live or visit. And if I'm here, stop and see me.
There you go. Thank you very much, Dorothea, and all of the families here today, and those of you who were not in the room with us. We kind of consider you, obviously they consider you family. All the daughters and sons and son-in-laws and brother-in-laws that aren't in this room, you're all included. A special feature, a time to spend with the Worst family in Lockport. As history continues, it's now your turn.